The story begins with the protagonist realizing he has been reincarnated in a new world. He is a baby, his room has candles instead of lamps, and people's clothes show something similar to the Middle Ages. His family appears to be quite wealthy, and he, who was previously an orphan who died from working so hard, now feels quite comfortable. At the age of 3, it was first time he saw the outside world, which seemed quite big to him, even though he was a child, but his adventure ended quickly. As being born the son of a duke, he could not be in danger at such a young age. His father is Grand Duke Dragonia of the Kingdom of Lionhart. Reaching the age of 8, extremely excited, he begins to learn the art of the sword, to eventually become a knight of the kingdom. He would learn from Sir Gothic, a holy knight sent from the palace, who appears happy, as he believes that this is the will of the goddess and that it will be very rewarding to teach him. A holy knight? Like this? This is more like child abuse, said the protagonist in the middle of the training, because at 14 years old he already had to move large stones only with strength, and complained about the difficulty in becoming a holy knight, as it involved training, quests, experience, honor, and finally being chosen by the Holy Grail and drinking the sacred water. And being the duke's son, he couldn't help but also learn the duties of an aristocrat. If there was a god, I would ask him to save me, he thought to himself, exhausted, even though he didn't believe in religion. At the age of 16, on his way to a burning city, he says he walked the world to receive divine recognition and become a holy knight. And this recognition would come precisely from fame and good deeds. Something ridiculous to him, but that would still allow him to use the sword. In the city, citizens are desperate in the face of the orc army that is about to invade the gates, but end up being saved by the protagonist who arrives killing everyone. At age 20 he meets the goddess and realizes that it wasn't a lie, and she really exists. And after many years he managed to become a holy knight. And then he went on to kill goblins, orcs, and also participants in the evil cult, and eventually became a war knight, with the authority to lead other knights. And the king, in a fight against the archdemon summoned by the empire, died. For humanity to continue with faith in the gods and the fight against demons, a holy knight was needed to become the new king, and the goddess Ariana chose our protagonist, who transplanted the goddess's holy lion heart treasure and swore to defend the Holy Grail. So over the course of 100 years, he waged war against great orc warriors, goblin archdemons, cultists, and monsters made from human lives, giving his all as he saw comrades fall on the battlefield and a world destroyed, all to try to eliminate the badly, but without being able to stop them. While he is faced with fear and the insecurity of not being able to defend his own, he places his trust in the goddess, who guarantees that she will be with him until the end. And in his last battle against billions of demons, he fought alone until the end, cutting everyone in his path and showing the power of a holy knight, destroying all the portals they used to escape. After a long 300 years a new portal opens, but this time humans come out of it and see the protagonist defeat the last archdemon with a single blow, who are scared, but the protagonist encourages them not to stay down, but to stand up and fight, and then introduces himself. I am King Lionhart, the knight who carries the will of the Holy Templars, Leon Dragonia Lionhart. Going back in time a little, now on Earth a portal opens in the middle of Seoul, and it is called a gate, and has an unknown rank. The Korean Hunters Association and the Global Hunters Association requested that the largest guilds participate in the attack, but the request was denied due to the difficulty of the gate being unknown. And in the end, the government ordered that the hunters of the Korean Association go first, which is the same as an execution, and entering the dungeon Han Hari. A red-haired hunter and the other hunters find the protagonist and an army of defeated demons. After returning to Earth, inside a room of the association, Han Hari, who we discover is the associate manager of the Hunters Association, is still in shock due to what she saw at the gate, and ends up being surprised by Kim Jin-soo, the association's chief manager, who brings her a coffee, and asks how it was, and Han Hari responds that no one can believe her story, and Kim responds saying that it was expected, because that was a black demonic gate, containing even the great demon, and having returned alive without the help of the other guilds was a true miracle, but when Han Hari is asked if she cleaned the gate she denies it, saying that a man did it alone, and then shows the silhouette of our protagonist. Then we are informed that Leon is a survivor, that is, someone who came out alive from a gate, and we are told that these survivors have incredible strength, and because of this all governments try to recruit them by granting their wishes. Then we see Han Hari again saying that they need to recruit him no matter what, because the protagonist is someone incredibly strong, and Kim adds that in fact, even a rank A hunter would have a risk of death when fighting a high-rank demon, but the protagonist killed the demon with just one attack, precisely a monster that even the most skilled S-rank hunters are afraid of. And in the background we see how the fight went, showing that he not only killed him but surpassed him in every way. Then we see Kim worried about the cultural difference the protagonist faces because he says that by the way the protagonist refers to himself, he is someone from royalty, and Han Hari tries to comfort him, saying that she thinks it won't be that difficult, because by the protagonist's voice, she sees that he is an extremely kind person, and without finishing we see the protagonist scream at the interrogator, calling him inferior and asking how he dared to sully the glorious name Lionhart. And, with this scream, we see the glass breaking, which leaves everyone in shock, because this glass was even able to resist attacks from monsters, and we see that Han Hari goes back and awkwardly says, "Yes, I think the culture is a little different." Then we see what led to this, going back 15 minutes, and we see that the protagonist thinks he is in a foreign nation, and remembers his past as an orphan, and how he died of exhaustion at the age of 20, and after that he was reincarnated in the other world as king and knight of a kingdom for more than a century, and then he hunted demons for 200 years, a total of 300 years in the other world, and thinks it's a relief to have memories of that place. Then we see the awkward interrogator, trying to say hello and call him by name, and we see that the protagonist thinks there's no benefit in revealing that he used to be an earthling, but that it'll be better to be recognized as a night king who lived 300 years in another world than as an orphan who died at age 20. Then the protagonist interrupts the interrogator, loudly orders him to be called Your Majesty, and belittles him by calling him a peasant, and the interrogator doesn't understand anything, but he follows his orders, and calls him Your Majesty. Then the protagonist goes back to thinking, seeing that he accepted his orders, but doesn't know if he's a good person or if the government takes care of survivors like him. Then the interrogator asks about the gate. Your Majesty, you were in contact with our hunters and you killed all those demons, correct? The protagonist confirms and asks if he has already forgotten, and again reminds him, saying that he killed all those evil species and protected the honor of the knights. And then the protagonist orders the interrogator to become his secretary temporarily, and grants him the privilege of recording this glorious incident. The interrogator is left in a state of confusion but tells himself that this is all because of the cultural difference. Then the protagonist reminds him that he is a king, and asks if there are no rules of etiquette where they are to treat him as such, meaning that he is hungry, and the interrogator promptly sends messages asking for food. While he waits, the protagonist asks for information about Earth to know what is different about the time he was in the other world. And the interrogator says that 30 years ago, gates began to appear around the world and monsters and demons came out of them, and because of this they lived in a constant state of emergency, and after a few losses they realized that each gate had a theme and a quest, and when a gate is left aside, there will be a dungeon break, and the monsters will invade Earth. Then comes the protagonist's meal, who is thinking about how in the other world demons came like mushrooms after a rain, but on Earth, there are gates with challenges, and he comes to the conclusion that this is almost like a preparation for humanity for something that is to come, but his thoughts are interrupted by the food being placed on the table. A bone broth, which makes Leon remember his days as a worker on Earth, and his mouth waters, but Leon forces himself to swallow his saliva and goes into denial, and with a dark aura asks the interrogator if he dared to serve him a food that is known as the soul of the peasants. And then again we see the scene of the protagonist's anger, seeing him shout at such insolence on their part, serving a king a peasant's food, and asking if this is how their kingdom treats another kingdom. So we see again who the protagonist is, Leon Dragonia Lionhart, king of another world, seeker of gods, guardian of the Holy Grail, owner of the sacred blade and the sacred spear, and also the one who waged war against millions of demons, and after returning from that 300-year war this is what he thought. This world is a mess. All this happened because there is no proper religious faith. And he thinks that clarifying this to the foolish peasants is the duty of the royal family. And despite having returned to Earth, he continues to be a night king. After this we see Leon eating a high-quality steak with a good vintage red wine. And we see that Kim orders Han Hari to go talk to Leon, because he seems to be interested in her, as he said that she was brave, so she won't be kicked out so easily. Then Han Hari enters the room fearfully and apologizes for interrupting His Majesty's dinner, but Leon recognizes her as the swordswoman he had seen earlier and tells her to sit down. When she does so she asks if he liked the dinner, and the protagonist replies that it wasn't bad, and can feel the sincerity of the chief, and completes by saying that his complaint was not due to the food being humble, but due to their attitude towards him, who is a king, and says that when greeting a foreign king he should be treated as such, and this should be related to the status of the nation. And upon hearing this, Hari is shocked, and recognizes that his lack of knowledge displeased his majesty. After this, Hari once again thinks about recruiting the protagonist for the Korean Association, and the importance of not letting him ally himself with another nation, and says that the South Korean government will do anything to make him join them. But Leon says that as a knight his duty is to fight on the battlefield, but loudly and clearly says that for a king he would never be a soldier in another nation's army. So he will create a new order of knights in this world. And upon hearing this, Hari is again shocked, so speechless that his only reaction was to nod. Outside, Hari, with his head down, asks what his superiors said, and Kim says that they have guaranteed all the necessary support, as they need to ensure that he becomes an ally. While Hari is irritated with the big guilds, an alert sounds, which is a sign that a dungeon break will occur, and to make matters worse, it will be in a crop, which will cause a complete loss of production. Hari asks about the Phoenix Guild, which was in charge of this gate, and that it wouldn't be a problem, since they have the hunter Lee Yong-won, who is a rank S. But Kim gets angry and says that they have other plans in mind. Leon, who heard everything that was happening behind the door, and once again remembers the lack of faith of the inhabitants of this world, calls out to Dem0ns, asking if she is okay. The scene cuts and we see in the field where the dungeon break is taking place that Lee Yong-won, leader of the Phoenix Guild that bought the right to clean the gate, was waiting for them outside, and we discover that the Phoenix Guild has requested a tax exemption on gate earnings, and to force this exemption they plan to let the dungeon break and contaminate the plantation. We then see Kim and Hari's desperation to clean the gate, but Lee doesn't give in and says that the members of his guild are tired, and will only be able to clean the gate tomorrow after the break happens. At that moment Leon arrives, and Hari greets him by name, but he reprimands her not to say His Majesty's name so casually and orders her to only call him by his title. Lee raises her voice to the protagonist, who orders silence, and with a look of hatred and contempt asks how such an insignificant person dares to speak. Upon hearing this, Lee begins to cast a spell, but Hari orders him to stop and warns him that Leon is a survivor. At that very moment Lee cancels the spell, lowers his head and acknowledges that he was rude, and asks the protagonist if he belongs to the Grey Guild. But the protagonist says that a king does not repeat his words, so Lee remains silent. And then Leon is informed about the contamination that the gate will cause if there is a dungeon break. Then Leon warns that tomorrow, when the Phoenix Guild loses the right to the dungeon, he, the king himself, will enter the dungeon, but first he will need the authorization of the current king of Korea, because he is in a foreign nation, and cannot do what he wants. Everyone is shocked by this information. Even Lee wonders if Leon is not even worse than him. After receiving permission, we are shown that it is dawn, and Leon has ordered preparations to be made, and we are shown a straw doll in the hands of Hari, who is at a loss as to why this is happening. Then the protagonist reminds her that the precious soil is infected, and will need to be cleaned, and Hari still cannot understand the purpose of the doll. We then discover that Leon requested two things. One was a straw doll, and the other was that the person to make the doll be a wife who had given birth. We are then shown many women with their dolls, and Leon orders that the dolls be presented to him. Upon seeing the first doll, it is discarded and destroyed in front of the woman who made it, and so many failures follow until an 89-year-old woman who had been married for a long time presented hers. Then the protagonist bends his knee and says it is incredible, and asks how many children she had, to which she replies 12, and the protagonist congratulates her, and says that she served the nation, and regrets not having a medal to give her, and apologizes for this failure. But the lady is happy anyway. After this, the doll is placed on a table with a candle, and from his subspace, the protagonist takes the Holy Grail, and says that the conditions have been met, and upon placing the Holy Grail on the table he begins his prayer, presenting the doll as a gift to the Mother of the Earth, and begs that this gift be accepted, and upon doing so, light radiates from the Holy Grail, and water begins to fill it, and we have a beautiful vision of the sun rising, and we see that a red tone tinges the clouds, and this sunrise will be special. Then we see the water float and enter the doll, and we see the doll standing up to everyone's amazement. Then Leon greets the Mother Earth Dem0ns, the goddess of life and abundance, who greets him. And at that moment a deity descended to Earth. Dem0ns then says that this new land is also being invaded by evil and that it is contaminated. And Leon agrees and says that there are no deities in this land, and fears that people as vulgar as the members of the Phoenix Guild may stain their eyes. But Dem0ns reassures him, as this will not always be judged as a sin, and acknowledges his condition, and asks what Leon plans to do. And Leon speaks of his firm purpose to make duty and authority also values in this land and promises to teach the ignorant and lead them on the right path, until a new pantheon emerges in this land. Dem0ns then asks if he has nothing to ask for, and says that they are always ready. Leon then asks for the healing and purification of the land, and Dem0ns encourages him, saying that he is the head of his temple, the champion of the gods, and that he will spread his divinity throughout the land, and replace the dirty land with his own flesh, and says that everything that walks in this land will be their ally. We see that with the touch of a drop that came from Dem0ns, a great irradiation of energy from the soil occurs, and we see an intense glow, which is followed by a lesson from Leon, who orders everyone to see and learn because this land was blessed with divinity. Leon continues speaking, saying that this is the duty of a living being and that this is the fertile land that is proof of an eternal promise, and we see that the land that was contaminated is now completely recovered and with an unparalleled appearance. Lee, upon seeing this, becomes angry and says that crops that grow with the use of magic are poisonous, which irritates Leon, who asks how he dares to judge that the crop is poisonous. Lee then does not shut up and calls the straw doll that Dem0ns used stupid, and even more irritated, Leon warns him that he will only forgive him once, and orders Lee not to stain the name of the goddess. Lee then becomes apprehensive that his plan is being ruined, and says that he will do a test on the quality of the rice. One of his subordinates, analyzing the rice, sees that the entire plantation is of rare rank, and is capable of curing level 3 diseases and even cancer, and everyone, except Leon, is amazed. But even with this information, Kim asks for a pot, and when cooking discovers that the rice gives a buff to stamina and mana recovery, and has an effect of 8 hours, and says that a plate of rice is equivalent to a reinforcement potion that costs 3 billion a bottle. Han Hari hurriedly says that out of curiosity he ate an insect, and even insects give buffs, and everyone is shocked to realize that even living beings have received the blessing. Dem0ns then calls Leon and says that his task has been completed, so he must return, and Leon, on bent knees, promises to never forget the love that Dem0ns bestowed upon them. Dem0ns then gives Leon one last piece of advice before leaving, asking him to eat well, and the doll falls, showing that Dem0ns is gone. Han Hari arrives and tries to ask Leon what this is, who answers by saying it is divine power, and asks if there is no God in this world, and Han Hari hesitates, saying she is not sure. Leon then educates her, saying that a proper life and the world are made with divine power and that she should remember this, and goes on to say that now that the soldiers are satisfied they will enter the gate. Lee then becomes irritated for a moment to see his plan fall apart, but soon an idea comes to him, thinking that Leon would be someone who only grants buffs, and Han Hari would be the only A rank in the group, and now he begins to count on their failure in the dungeon, which we soon discover contains a monster that cannot be defeated using common methods.